I came out of university in the 1990s, and Edmonton was not the place to be. Don Getty, if you recall, just failed to win a seat. Jan Reimer was mayor. Business was at a standstill. There were no jobs. Most of my friends were leaving for Vancouver or for Toronto. The province was running a $3 billion deficit and was $20 billion in debt, and the spirit of Edmonton was at an all-time low. Ralph Klein came into power in 1992, and he made the hard choices that people living beyond their means have to eventually make. And he set out to slay the deficit and the debt at all costs. We've benefited from those tough decisions. They've made Albertans who we are today, although we may be still catching up for the infrastructure deficit that was created as he cut too far. Economic Development Edmonton, my organization, was established in 1993 under the leadership of Rick Lawlisher, bringing together 4 separate organizations: the Shaw Conference Centre, Edmonton Tourism, Edmonton Research Park, and Economic Development, into one organization, knowing that the synergies that between them could be best realized if they were under one management structure. Bill Smith became mayor in 1995, and he really focused on raising the morale of Edmontonians. You remember Bill? The best city in the best province in the best country was his mantra, and he was the cheerleader we needed at the time to lift the spirits and to get us thinking positively in the city. Cal Nichols and company saved the Oilers. Might have to do that again. The internet was just becoming mainstream when our organization came out with Vision 725, which stated that 7% of our GDP would come from knowledge-based industries by the year 2025. It was a bold vision inspired by Vi Becker, whose bold vision for diversification, and we're well on our way. Jim Edwards took over EDE through the boom and the bust of the internet, and then Alan Scott, one of my true mentors, started a great number of initiatives. He solved the Shaw labor dispute that was undergoing, fundamentally redesigned the relationship with the council, did the deal on the Dell building and the research park, which was a great deal at the time. We were in the call center business. Started Ventureprise, Tech Edmonton, redesigned the research park, built Hall D, and did the deal on the World Trade Center. And he couldn't have done it without a great relationship with this gentleman named Stephen Mandel. And what history shows is that when the head of EEDC and the mayor are in sync, and council are in sync, great things can happen. And when they're disconnected, the city can perish. Ed Stelmach came along in 2006, along with my predecessor, Ron Gilbertson, in 2007. And if you recall, we were in boom time again. Low unemployment, huge inflow of immigration, record GDP growth, record labor shortages, record oil prices. Everything was grand. The economy was so hot, in fact, that we made the conscious decision to get out of the traditional economic development business and focus our attention on labor attraction. But then our over-leveraged commodity price world collapsed. As we look at the price of oil, Bear Stearns went under in March 2008, Lehman Brothers followed in September, and literally over a weekend, the entire global economy came to a halt. Credit markets evaporated, ships were stranded in the Atlantic with no ports to dock, financial institutions were declared bankrupt over the weekend, and global trade fundamentally came to a standstill. Everyone froze. And over the next 5 years, as the world was in disarray, searching for stability and security, we learned a lot about ourselves here in Edmonton. We learned that when the price of oil went from $140 to $40 in 6 months, we still had net positive migration, net positive employment gains, a downturn that was much milder than other jurisdictions, even our neighbor to the south, and a rebound that has let us not only have us leading the country, but just about every other regional economy in the Western world. We learned that our economy is more diversified, the booms and busts are mellower, our standard of living is more resilient than others, and our quality of life is more attractive than we give ourselves credit for. Of course, Premier Stelmach resigned on January 26, 2011, and Alison Redford became our Premier in October 2011 with a new vision for the province, for a more progressive, compassionate Alberta that will now be challenged because we have new long-term risks to our balance sheet. And when you map that history against the price of oil, you can see on the chart that our political leaders and our economic leaders all managed through booms and busts, and the self-esteem of Edmontonians has been equally as volatile, and we need to change that. As we look forward over my term, over the next 5 to 10 years, and potentially with a new mayor, what we know to be true is that we're extremely well positioned versus just about every other jurisdiction in the world, but we're entering a low-growth world where the word competition will forever be redefined. Our self-esteem issues must be conquered, and we can no longer be asleep in the back seat anymore. Whether it be RBC, TD, CIBC, or John Rose, the city economists, we're all expecting Alberta and Saskatchewan to outperform the rest of Canada, and Edmonton to be the economic and entrepreneurial powerhouse of the nation, one of the top 2 to 3 municipalities in North America in terms of growth. A high-growth jurisdiction in a low-growth world, they say. And what's driving that growth? Well, let's go through the shopping list. We have massive commodity demand. What we have, the world wants. We have a democratic government, stability of government regulations, property rights. We've got separation of our judicial system. We can repatriate capital. We've got sound banking system. Our credit rating is one of the strongest in the world. We have an open culture, and we have an immigration, education, and health system that everybody wants. What we also have is we've got a base of $56 billion of GDP. That GDP is growing at a rate of about 3.5% a year. Our GDP per capita is nearing $50,000 per person. Our unemployment rate is less than 4.3%. We've got no sales tax, the overall lowest income tax and tax structure in just about anywhere in North America. We've got a population growing at about 22,000 people a year, which is the equivalent of putting a city of Red Deer here every 4 years. We've got a labor shortage of about 114,000 people over the next 10 years. We have capital expenditure on our books in northern Alberta of about $220 billion, and if we expand that out to include Canada's north, we're dealing with about $330 billion over the next 20 years. And our economy's changed where we have a critical mass now in our service industry that we never had before. And if you had a shopping list as to the things you're looking for in order to move to a jurisdiction or invest in a location, it would probably look like this. At EDC, our principal objective is for Edmonton and the capital region to outperform every regional jurisdiction in North America consistently over the next 20 years. And what's most important, we have to do that whether the price of oil is $140 or $40. And we measure outperformance in terms of us outperforming other jurisdictions in terms of 2 things, GDP per capita and standard of living. And what an opportunity we have while the world is going through some extremely tough times, and our neighbor to the south is going through some extremely tough times, challenged by sovereign debt, political divisiveness. And where I come from, when the going gets tough, the tough acquire market share, and it's our time. After I took this role in August, on September 13th, we lost possibly one of the greatest Albertans of all time. And when I heard of his passing, I was wounded, yet in a strange way, inspired. And I think back on the 2 lessons this gentleman taught me. The first was the importance of trying to remember every single person's name, which he was so good at. And the second was that Alberta needs a master plan. And when I was running Doug Horner's leadership campaign, I met with Peter at the McDonald Hotel, and Jeannie was there. And he leaned in and he took off his glasses like he does, and he says, Mr. Ferguson, the United States had a master plan where, number 1, they built up their military to the point where their Navy controlled the flow of goods in the Pacific and the Atlantic. That allowed them to use their fiscal policy to extend debt to other countries in order to secure air rights to protect the interests of American companies. That was their plan. Alberta has a master plan too. And with the U.S. now stumbling financially, we can't take our eye off the ball. The plan was this. First, we need to create a policy environment that spawns entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial spirit. Why? Because entrepreneurial people can take responsibility for themselves and their families. And if entrepreneurism creates a culture of self-reliance, we have less dependence on government. And if people are self-reliant and less dependent, we can maintain a small, smart, stable government with a predictable business and investment environment. And if we have small, smart, stable government, we can ensure our tax environment is always kept below that of the United States and the rest of Canada. As other governments continue to borrow, interest rates will continue to rise, and eventually they have to tax their citizens. At that stage, we have the opportunity to differentiate here. And that's when we need to raise our game and compete for workers, investors, entrepreneurs, families, researchers, in a low tax environment at a time when the world also needs our resources. And if we do those four things, long term, we've created a sustainable competitive advantage here in Alberta and specifically Edmonton. And Edmonton will be a beacon towards which all people who crave opportunity will come. Fantastic lesson. Now, as the head of the Economic Development Authority, I traditionally would stop here and show you a whole bunch of graphs that point upwards and everything is rosy. But I think it's important and more valuable that we provide some insights into some of the dark clouds looming that have potential of throwing some of the forecasts we all hear into question. And from my perspective, there are 6 categories that we need to all be conscious of and talk about. And these are long-term categories. The first globally is we have negative growth in Europe. We have a US that isn't recovering as fast as we're thinking. We have a manufacturing sector, it is, but the housing sector isn't, and the consumption function isn't. We have China that used to be in double-digit growth rates, and it will for a little while, but it's going to eventually mature down to single-digit growth rates, as all mature countries start to do. And that creates a shift in where the growth happens in the world. And where the growth is coming from is not where we're connected to, and we need to become connected to it. Nationally, we have an escalating loonie. We have a growing environment of entitlements and social agendas that cost a lot of money. We've got provincial debts reaching their tipping point, resulting in what I call as an east-west envy that will jade our national public policy environment in favor of central Canada. And we need to shift our language here in Alberta and specifically in Edmonton. We need to have less bravado about Alberta and more about our contribution to the country. Provincially, we have an escalating cost structure that's unsustainable, and we have a revenue model that provides no certainty. And if you get caught offside multiple years in a row, which we've done today, we have multiple deficits that turn into debt, which eventually leads to higher interest rates that have to be offset by higher taxes. And we need to start talking about what the Premier isn't talking about, and that's a stable revenue framework that Mr. Horner's working on for the province for our future. At the industry level, we have much more supply of our energy sector, and that's expected to be coming into the market. And we have oil intensity demand that used to be straight line demand that's now coming off in China and the US, as both those countries are becoming more efficient. Our models that we counted on are not necessarily secure anymore. And we continue to be a landlocked province with fixed pipeline capacity, higher labor costs, all of which to increased uncertainty and a deceleration of capital expenditures up north. Not right away, but these are things we need to be concerned about. At the firm level, companies are lined up to come here and to compete for our share of this growth in the world market. And they're hungry. They're much hungrier than the typical Alberta firm, which tends to work hard enough Monday to Thursday so Friday they can go to the cottage. And our aging business owners are more risk adverse than they were in the past. We're not investing in research, innovation, machinery, technology, and equipment to keep them highly productive in an increasingly competitive world. And that's of concern. We need to create an environment where every business is a growth business again, and we can eradicate this disease called complacency. At a personal level, we have an aging workforce on one hand and an increasingly immigrant and Aboriginal workforce on the other hand. And in between, we have a workforce that has a little bit of an entitlement culture and massive personal debt loads. And they're singing, what have you done for me lately? When the competition's saying, I want this job, I need this job because I need to feed my family. And it's all in an environment where the growth in wages and the growth in salaries is starting to decline. And these are very real challenges, and we can't afford to be complacent. And we certainly can't afford to be asleep in the back seat. At EEDC, we understand these realities facing our economy, the opportunities and the threat, and there's significant work to be done. Our board and our shareholder have made it extremely clear that they want us to, number one, get back in the economic development business, where business and industry is our customer. We want to become the change. We need to become the change we want to see in the marketplace. We need to be competitive versus complacent as an organization. We need to fundamentally change the value we're delivering in the market. We need to bring clarity and confidence to our structure so it makes sense to you. And we need to redefine our relationship with our stakeholders, whether it be the plans, the chamber, such that the entire economic system starts to work better together. And that's our mandate. How are we responding at EEDC? Well, first, we can't chase every shiny object that comes through the door. We need to build a business that does the same thing day in, day out, so we build our industries and strengthen our industries. We're focused on 7 priority areas, which are traditionally clusters or sectors. And we're going to be working with the business leaders in each one of these sectors to define what are the challenges and what are the opportunities and what are common, how can we help you move things forward. And they tend to fall into 5 priority areas. The first is the attraction of and the retention of people, the attraction of investment, and the attraction of business to the area. We need to focus on opportunities for market expansion, specifically in Canada's north, in China, and to do more work in the United States. We need to create a culture of entrepreneurism and an entrepreneurial ecosystem that encourages risk-taking. Our firms are working with entrepreneurial organizations so they are more productive, more innovative, more entrepreneurship, and they don't flatten out. They continue the growth. We need to make our economics and analytics department that we use internally, we need to open that up and it'll be of value to the community. So you can use our data, you can use our information. And we need to take on some things from a policy point of view. When things don't get done, we need to take on things from the city's point of view and challenge the province, challenge the feds, such that we're moving the agenda of Edmonton forward. And then we need to market the heck out of the city. Every year, our success should be measured by the level of industry engagement and industry satisfaction with what we're doing, as well as making sure industry is leading the implementation of the priorities that we're putting on, and they're funding that. And that's the ultimate litmus test as to whether we resonate in the market. In your statement of intent that you all have on your table, our outcomes are pretty straightforward. We need an accelerated inflow of new business, investment, and people. We need to have a confident, authentic brand that's well marketed in certain jurisdictions. We need to have a competitive business environment that facilitates entrepreneurism, innovation, and business expansion. We need to have resilient and diversified business growth and employment opportunities. And we need to have an informed, engaged, and networked business community and stakeholder community. And that's the expectation of us. That's our promise to you. And I can promise you we'll never fail because we didn't try hard enough. And we'll never fail because we came unfocused. Because that's the only way you have impact. It's also the spirit of Edmonton. And it's something that unites us, everyone in this room. Whether you're from the private sector or the public sector, whether you're 25 years old or 65 years old, whether you like it when it's 30 degrees above or 40 degrees below, we all came here in search of an opportunity to grow something, to build something. And you all you choose to stay here because you're building something here. And that's kind of our statement. We want to invite the world to come build it here, whatever your it is. It could be your career, it could be your business, it could be your family, your skills, your life. Whatever your opportunity is, we need to issue an invitation to the world to be a part of this crowd and build it here. Thank you very much.